which I thought made it more credible to the extent that would matter to folks.
Mm,
So, in any case,
yeah, it was a good interview for
yeah,
sure.
I think so too. So, Blindsight 2020 interview coming out on both conventional wisdom and from Is to Ought here in the next week and a half or so. And
Hmm.
then, Sam, when is Bitcoin 3? Just kidding, it was all a joke coming out.
It's a scam. Run. No. It should be out before the end of the year. It's tough to say, especially with these Bitcoin episodes. Like I, I try my best to be quick on these releases, but inevitably what happens is, I mean, if you know anything about Bitcoin and if you're into it at all, you understand the many layers that Bitcoin has. So covering everything is impossible. So there's always like this rewrite that I'm doing, trying to figure out what's the best way to say this. And then I also know that I'm not speaking to, well, I'm trying to speak to someone who knows very little to nothing about Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
Like if somebody was listening to my podcast and like wanted to recommend it to their mom or grandmother or something like that, it's like I'm trying to slowly step through this and not get into the weeds because I don't want to scare anybody off, which was difficult on my first episode because the first episode kind of just describing what it is I mean, you can kind of get a sense if it's your first introduction to Bitcoin, you can kind of get a sense of what it is, but you won't get the scope and magnitude of it until after 2 and 3. So it's difficult, and so I just got to go through and make sure I cross my T's and dot my outlaws.
Are you going to talk about CBDCs?
Um, if I was, that would be on my third one,
Okay.
and that's a really good idea. I mean, I certainly can. That again, that's if I was aiming this episode at someone who more or less doesn't know anything about Bitcoin, and I'm trying to get them on board, a CBDC would be a tangential topic, but it's actually a pretty good one and very worth going over. So, if anybody doesn't know, a CBDC stands for central bank digital currency or a central bank digital control, if you wanted to get cheeky with it. But there's been several people high up individuals like in the IMF and other organizations that have basically said they were sort of swooning over the idea of a CBDC being able to, like, your currency could expire if you didn't spend it after a given amount of time. Like they'd have complete control. If you bought too much gas that month, they could just say, okay, you can't buy any more gas. Like this, it comes with so much uh, financial control that, well, some of these central bankers were salivating at the idea. So that should tell you something that um, it's a plague. You should stay away from it.
Mm-hmm.
But
Just to clarify, for those of us that don't know much about the Bitcoin stuff, IMF is not the impossible mission force like from Mission Impossible, right? It's some other thing.
Is
I'm
exactly
no,
assuming.
that.
no, it's
Okay.
real, Kyle. It's real.
Is it? No.
It stands for International Monetary Fund,
Oh, that makes sense.
and yeah, they're kind of like, well, yeah, they it's if there was a central world bank, they would try to be one. So yeah, they want control over the currency,
The
and
tension seems to be
Bitcoin.
something like between centralization on one end via digital ledgers and then decentralization on the other with digital ledgers. Is that fair?
I mean, so um, are you talking about are you trying to put the IMF somewhere, or what are you trying to? Are
No,
you
the
trying to?
CBDCs versus Bitcoin, kind of.
Oh, yeah, CBDCs are when you say ledger, I mean, so I was
Bitcoin
listening
is
to
basically an Excel sheet.
was okay, that was the joke because there was I was listening to this sort of promo for this CBDC, and they were like they were saying like this central, not, they didn't use the word centralized, but they said localized ledger technology, and I was like, you mean a spreadsheet, dude?
Yeah, yeah.
Like that's not technology. You know, the reason why Bitcoin is a ledger is and it's decentralized on purpose, and it needs to be that way. It's the only really good use of a blockchain ledger.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else, there's no need. If there's a central bank controlling the currency, there's no need to have any sort of open ledger or anything like that. There's no need for it. They're just going to have it on a spreadsheet somewhere, and they're going to control it. So, yeah, CBDC is control. Bitcoin is freedom. There you go, Mike.
Well, we will see. I'm hedging my bets. Getting good with the IMF. All right, Kyle, talk to us about your innovation miniseries, man.
Yeah, so Innovation Miniseries is a new spin up. One of the things we did at my old company was we did these kind of type innovation shares at the beginning of meetings and stuff. And I was like, that's a great idea, because part of being innovative is keeping that top of mind, as sharing other ideas. And so that's really the purpose of that mini series, is to really just talk about different ideas. And that also spun off from two things: the timing, the bandwidth lately. So I definitely wanted to still do some podcasting. So doing these quicker bite-sized 5-minute episodes are a lot easier to crank out, as opposed to doing the full depth of just the research that goes into like a normal full-length episode. So that was one thing. But the other one was there are a lot of different topics that I knew I wanted to touch on that I couldn't really dedicate a full episode towards. And so that's what we pushed into the mini series. So if you were to think about it, the first one was ideas that pop. So it was around popcorn, movie theater popcorn. And it was about how people were innovative when it came to popcorn in the 30s, and how after the World War II, or during World War II, it became a little bit more, I guess you can say, popular, because of the resources that were strained due to the war that involved all of the world. So that was one of the things that really just, I wanted to say, expanded, like blew up the popcorn industry, pun intended. But it really focused, like that became a staple of movie theater, like pastimes, whatever you want to call it. So not only that, but the markup. So like the science behind it, thinking of, hey, we can really make like a 900% profit off of this popcorn idea. So I found that pretty interesting. And the most recent one was AI driving. So we're not really there yet. I know we have like some car manufacturers that have autonomous vehicles or driving assist. You'll see that with like Hyundai, GM, and then you have like Tesla. Those aren't true AI driven autonomous vehicles yet. So I was really speaking towards no human interaction. So just the ethics, and we'll use the trolley car scenario in that episode to discover a little bit more on just, it really is really a thought starter. I didn't really solve any world problem with that episode. It's more of a, hey, let's think about this for a second. But what does it look like for AI, and the dilemmas, the moral and ethical dilemmas they have to face, or I say they, that the machine has to face when it comes to human life and preserving that. So those are what those two episodes were about. A new one I've got coming up in the future, probably in the next month and a half or so, is around, I am going to do a full episode, and it's going to be around creativity, going back to my roots on leadership development. And we're going to be talking around how curiosity, or what the impact of curiosity is, and what it can have on a team, but also the leader's role of that team, how that can impact the individual's ability or comfortability to be curious. And so we're going to be diving into that.
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
How do you think so we all went to university together. How do you think, even before university, like our school system, what do you think its impact has been on creativity in general?
I mean, it really, for me, it taught me to think inside the box, for certain things. But it also, it opened my mind to other things. I know, like I studied a lot when it came to like oil and gas, just as a resource, not like as a policy. I mean, we did that too, but as a resource. And so And what I really found is like maybe that's just my way of thinking is like you tell Kyle one thing and he's going to write the notes on like the completely wrong thing. And so what I came, for instance, we talked about oil and gas as a finite resource and how there's like a limited supply. That's what we talked about. That's what was written and we studied. And what I came out of that class realizing is that water is actually the real finite resource. So like I completely it forced me to almost disprove what we were learning. So if I were to apply the scientific method, maybe who knows? But it also it forced me to go research. Like, is this true? I really didn't trust what I was learning at the time, and so I had to dive in a little deeper just because of what you're hearing going on around.
Mm.
And so I feel like at one point, if anything, university taught me to research more before coming up with like a final answer on something.
So what about even before university? Just, I mean, what was your experience like? Because for me, I didn't figure this out until later, but it seemed like my curiosity and my creativity. Well, both. Did I ask you about curiosity or creativity?
Creativity. You might have asked me both. I can't remember.
But you had mentioned curiosity. I meant to say curiosity.
Okay.
But you can kind of lump them together. But at least from my experience, the school system had sort of put a like damper on my curiosity and my creativity to some degree. And I didn't know that at the time, because at the time you don't know, you're just sort of taking notes, like you said, and like learning what they kind of spoon feed you. But I mean, I think what was it? Einstein said like the school system has ruined the holy spirit of creativity or curiosity. Sorry, curiosity. But that was my experience. I don't know about y'all's.
I can see that from like a strictly engineering perspective, though. It depends on like what. Again, it really depends on the classes. I really do think that the professors have a huge influence on that experience. And when I talk to and we all the joke is, oh, engineers, they think inside the box. Like that was like the running joke, but it was more of like it really depends on.
That's not funny.
I know, but for engineers, like, can you really be risky when it comes to, we're gonna try this new idea with this bridge that we're about to build? Like, you have to really to be curious and to be creative, because there's a lot of creative engineers, there's a lot of creative architects. Obviously, we have some great marvels that were designed in history and now, and you look at what's the buildings that are still going up. So, from a building perspective, but then you also have like creativity from like roadways, construction, how you design like infrastructure. So there's that too. So I don't want that to be lost.
Right.
But I do think that, yeah, depending on the types of courses that you were exposed to, I mean, I can speak for me personally, because the only engineering class I took was a calculus class and maybe a machine shop class, and that was it. There was no being curious around. There was like, you have to basically lathe this rod down to a valve stem. Like, okay, that was it. That was pretty straightforward. Where you got to drill this hole into this block of steel. I'm completely trivializing that, but I know for me, some of the courses that I had, the instructions are very vague. Like, do this report, and it has to be 1,000 words, and that was it. And we did one on like pirates and how they've like navigated around the South Florida panhandle, or the south of Florida, and so it's like that, and that we still got a good grade on it. So it allowed us to be a little bit more creative with our report, as opposed to like a very cut and dry. Like it gave us the ability to be more curious and go. I would never have researched anything on pirates had it not been for that class and Assassin's Creed Black Flag.
What
So,
grade was this?
Yeah, exactly, right? That was
that was like sophomore year of college.
It was like anywhere between sophomore and senior year, somewhere like that. I don't know if I answered your question though.
I don't think you did.
Yeah,
that's okay.
That's fine. But Mike, I'm curious what you think, because you're steeped in it.
Oh,
as far as the let's like, okay, on university, right? So, do you find there's more creativity, less, more curiosity, less?
I think that any sort of disciplining funnels curiosity at first, because it takes like the landscape of things that you could be doing to a particular landscape, and then you develop therein, and then after you develop some expertise, you can branch back out with this new skill set and apply it creatively or in new contexts. I mean, it's certainly the case for what we're teaching now, like with information systems and business analytics. It's like, okay, can you apply programming and statistics. So, yeah, those are pretty ubiquitous. You can probably get pretty creative with those things. It doesn't mean that there's no rules or that, all programming is just as good as any other programming or just as valid, but going through the process of actually disciplining yourself allows you to become more creative on the other side. But during the process, if you're going to write a for loop, it has to evaluate the way you want it to. Otherwise, you were unsuccessful in that endeavor.
Yeah, I can see that. It's gaining domain knowledge first, and then being able to be creative with that knowledge and applying it in different ways. I mean, we all have to learn how to use a hammer first before we can start building. Like, well, I say we have to all know how to use the chisel first before we can start building cathedrals. And so, it really you have to have the fundamentals.
Coming next year, by the way, FreedomCast Cathedral.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so
I already got my tools.
Perfect. Yeah, they're right behind him. Brought to you by DeWalt.
No chisels though. I don't have one of those.
Can't do it. Can't do it.
Can't do it.
All right. The updates on the Freedomist to Hot Front are that fake news mini-series. I have interviewed 2 folks so far and have some more slated. First was Julie Mastrini, who's a director of marketing and media bias ratings at All Sides Media. I thought that was a particularly good episode. She was an excellent guest and provided some insight on what her organization does and kind of the evolution in trends in media over the last, say, 6, 7, maybe 8 years. And I think it's a good kind of initial episode to set up the panoply of problems that fake news corresponds with, media bias being chief among them, but not the only one. Then I interviewed a peer of mine who's out at the University of Arkansas named Syed, and that interview will come out before December of this year as well. And we kind of touch on, he's more focused on news media generally, whereas I'm more narrowly focused on fake news. But he has a similar kind of read on the issue as I do, and a take on the research landscape. So we discussed that in kind of, lay terms so that people can kind of get access to what's being said behind the scenes and behind the paywalls of academic papers. And then hopefully, another 10 or a dozen episodes to come thereafter. I do know that I've been turned down by at least one guest that was probably going to be a more contentious interview.
Did Don Lemon ever return your email?
I haven't heard from Don yet. No, I haven't heard from. No, he also didn't get an email, though. I'd interview him for sure. The person who turned me down was Nina Jankowicz, who was going to be head of the DHS, I don't even remember what it was called, Misinformation Task Force or something like that. Anyway, I might wait to see how her lawsuit with Fox News pans out, because I would like to include how that goes. I have a feeling I know which way it's going to go. Before referencing her work and the work of that team. So definitely we'll still be talking about, not her specifically necessarily, but that process of setting up a governmental bureaucratic structure, what its constraints were going to be, what its constraints most certainly were not, despite her protestations. So anyway, that's the update there. Speaking of podcasts, let me bring up this bingo card, because as we will do for quarterly live streams for at least a while, we are going to have podcast bingo. So if you connect any 5 adjacent squares in a row, and you demonstrate that you just send a screenshot showing us you've watched one full episode of each, we will send you about $45 in free FreedomCast merch. And this can go to the same person multiple times, but each quarter we will give up to 3 people free merch. So this is the bingo card. You can take a screenshot now if you'd like. I will also try and put a link to it in the notes of this live stream, so that if people watch this later, they can have access to it. All right. Next on the agenda, there is a new podcast launching on our network. we have one new one to announce this quarter, and we may have a second new one to announce next quarter. But let me get this new one called the Identity Redacted Podcast pulled up. There we go. All right. So the Identity Redacted Podcast will be launching at the end of this year. Our first episode will probably come out in December. This is the podcast rather that we've teased a few times, that will host whistleblowers, anyone who wants to discuss topics or have a conversation that they wouldn't feel comfortable having with their name tied to it for either just personal reasons, social reasons, professional reasons, what have you. And we'll take some, technological steps on our end to try and preserve people's anonymity. Obviously, nothing can be fully guaranteed, but this will be the Identity Redacted Podcast coming end of 2023 at FreedomCast. And I believe I have our first two guests lined up, and they're actually going to take on a controversial, somewhat topic.
What are their names?
No. They're going to take on a controversial topic, and I think they're actually going to take opposing sides of the topic. So that'll be interesting.
Oh, fun.
Are you going to do a voice modulator?
For them, maybe.
Just for the whole podcast.
No, I will probably keep my voice.
No, not for you. It would be for the guest, right?
Right. That's what I was asking.
Wait, so you will change the name of the voice of the guest?
I will give that option to them, yes.
Okay, cool. I'll hit you up later.
Okay, cool.
It's you.
Yeah. Well, Kyle is
Yeah,
not one of the
I've got some
first
complaints.
two. So
I've got some complaints against our current leadership of this company.
It's us, man.
a year and a half in, and he still can't launch live streams correctly. By the way, we did get up on YouTube just 8 minutes late. So
I see it.
yeah. All right. So we've got Podcast Bingo. We have Identity Redacted. That's a kind of a cleanup of all of our current goings on for the major series that each of us is working on. Carry us through the end of the year and somewhat beyond for some of it. Next, let's talk politics and world events, boys. Kyle,
Let's do it, gentlemen.
Israel,
Kyle, kick us
Hamas.
off, buddy.
Which one's the
Yeah.
right one? Who you cheering
Oh.
for?
Well,
Which
I
team
guess
are
I'll
you
show
on?
I'll show my true colors here. I will go with what the Bible tells me to go with, which right now is, support Israel. So,
Is that what the Bible says?
I mean, it's the land that God chose to develop as a nation, and so any threat or infringement upon that, yeah. I'm also against children being murdered and slaughtered in front of their parents for no reason. I'm sure they had their reasons, but I'm also against that. So that would naturally put me on the opposing side of Hamas.
Well, that's a bold statement. You sure you want to come out that strongly against murder of children in front of their parents? Also, what if that's happening on the other side? Would you also be against it?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't agree with I would be against him, but like I said, it's pure evil. So whatever, doesn't mean that I would say choose a side, except for what, like I said, the Bible clearly states, the Bible supports Israel. I mean, I'd have to go pull the verses in Romans to really articulate that a little bit more, but it's really not the Romans,
I gotcha.
but the book of Romans. Let's be clear about that. So, yeah, I mean, what else would you like for me to stumble on here?
Was the he's throwing this your way.
What is your thoughts on the 1948?
The Balfour Declaration rather. No, my understanding of the biblical part of it is the God covenant with Israel takes on a different meaning for Christians than it does for people who practice Judaism. Isn't the covenant for people like us, isn't that supposed to mean something different than what it means to Jewish folks?
I would say so. I mean, there's definitely a separation there at one point. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's old religion and new religion, I guess, is from what I gathered from it, and it's been a transition that's been trying to happen for thousands of years. So,
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, Sam, what do you have?
Yeah.
Big thoughts?
Well, I mean, so yes. In the most general sense, I think that the West has put forth a set of ideals for their values on a civilization front. And I tend to agree with them. And I think that they are the best set of civilization values that has been put forth. And therefore, I would be put on Israel's side for that alone. That does not mean there hasn't been bad actors and bad events and horrible atrocities on either side. But if I were to pick a camp, that's where I would go off of that ruling alone. And I mean, there's some other bits to it. I mean, I think there's Kyle, what you said about just murdering children and stuff. So I'm sure children have died as a cause of the Israeli attacks or some of their whatever they're doing. But I think there's a big difference between going into a civilian location and purposely finding and killing any civilian you can get your hands on versus trying to take out terrorists and then happen to kill civilians in your path. I think there's a moral difference there. I cannot sift through every historical event, and you might attribute that to laziness. I'm perfectly fine with having that labeled there because I just don't have the time to sit through and to try and get to the bottom of this snake's nest of historical events as far as who did what first. And quite frankly, it seems like every time somebody brings up the point of like, yeah, well, this happened, then the other side says, yeah, well, they did it because of this, and then we'll know it's because of this, and like you never really get to the bottom of anything. And on its surface, from what I can tell, this seems to be like I said, it's on the surface. It seems to be a dispute of land. At least that's what a lot of people might say. And when asked like, well, why did some of this stuff happen? It's because they believe one group is occupying a particular land. But then that kind of breaks down, in my view, when there seems to be no at least for the event of October 7th, there really was no attempt to take land. It simply was an attack on anyone living in that area. So I'm not convinced that it
seems like.
Yeah, I'm not convinced that that's the argument. I think there's something deeper going on, and I've heard the idea that one side wants the other side dead. Of course, Hamas states that in their charter, so it's hard for not sure how you can refute that. Of course, I have heard people say, well, yeah, Hamas is bad, but that the Palestinians also have it pretty bad under Israeli oppression, they would say. And I don't have much of a defense of that. I really don't. Again, you can call it laziness, but it doesn't seem to. Well, I think in general is Israel, right? So there's more than just Jews living in Israel. So they have like what 20% Arabs, something like that. It's like the only democracy in the region. It's like the only place where you might have free speech. I don't know if it exists 100% there or not, but at least compared to its neighbors, it's doing pretty well. You actually have technology and a bunch of things that exist there. It doesn't seem like the other countries, or at least it doesn't seem like the people that vehemently hate Israel are too worried about those things. So, yeah, I think in my view, in my estimation, Israel has the moral high ground, but that doesn't mean that they haven't done anything wrong. And like I said, I'm not going to defend every single action because I can't, but in general terms, I think that's kind of where I stand.
Okay. Yeah, so half of my family's from the Middle East and not Israel. And, there's mixed feelings amongst that crowd. But what I'll say is I think you should be able to take things in kind of verticals. So like the 10/7 events, it's like in its own right, there's no justification for that. It was clearly horrific. It was clearly an act of terrorism. It was clearly barbaric, no question. No amount of like land disputes or settlements really. It's a tough sell to try and justify that. At the same time, the response has been outsized. So I'm sure that by this point, the ratio is at least probably 5 to 10 to 1 in terms of lives lost, and including children. And it's not. I mean, yes, I agree that it does strike me that Hamas's terrorism is more indiscriminate than Israel's attacks on Palestinian-controlled regions, but it's not. That
Can
doesn't
I
mean
ask you a
that.
question?
Uh-huh.
Uh, what? How heavy does that metric weigh in your calculus? The ratio of lives lost either side.
No, ratio of lives lost doesn't matter except to the extent that you're talking about innocent lives. Then it does start to matter to me. Yeah.
Okay.
But, if you say like whatever, we're fighting a million, malicious combatants and we killed a million of them and they only killed one of our folks. It's like that 1,000,000 to 1 ratio doesn't bother me. In theory, obviously it would matter within a context, but no, there's a lot of non-combatants being killed. And look, my impression is that, I have done a little bit of reading the history and grew up kind of in a family where we discuss these kind of things a bit anyway. And so I don't have nearly like I don't have an impulse to just defend Israel at all. But that's not to say that I think that they have no right to respond or that the state of Israel should exist. I think the state of Israel should exist as far as I'm concerned. The idea that, we would be upset about one particular type of theocracy in a region filled with theocracies is laughable to me. The Palestinians probably do get treated better than in Israel than they do elsewhere. The Arab neighbors are not super keen on necessarily bringing the Palestinians in to Egypt, Jordan, etc., into their countries, though they have it to some extent, but historically and even very recent history have not been as keen on that. So, it doesn't strike me as obvious that is all 100% Israel's fault. But at the same time, Hamas, launches attacks from near hospitals, schools, UN buildings, etc. I think there was even, I don't know if it was AP, but there was some reporting team that was bunking in a building with Hamas at some point in a recent history, 3-4 years ago. And so we get this tension in our media where there is definitely like a pro-Israel segment of our media who will not call, it seems anyway, does not call Israel out for anything except for not being harsh enough in its defense. And then there's another segment in our media which is kind of like it's filled with the same spirit of those jerks who are like all tearing down signs all over the place, all over college campuses and all over like major cities, who kind of like have this like, victimhood as a virtue type ethos. And those people are not going to give the conflict a fair shake either. And so you see this battle, and you see it on Twitter a lot, or X a lot right now. There are for sure falsehoods going around on both sides, and I take it as like I can't trust really anything that's coming out of that area right now. But there is one side that is saying things that are demonstrably false somewhat regularly from some pretty high profile people, and that's the side that is sometimes tacitly, sometimes explicitly defending Hamas's actions. So in any case, it's horrible. I'm not quite sure Israel's has historically been the ally that many people would make it out to be. Like you can read about the USS Liberty, for example. But the one counterweight I would say because I know there's a lot of folks that we listen to, like Prager and Shapiro, etc., who give, honest, I think, from their perspective, defenses of Israel. There's this podcast, and I'll bring it up on the screen, called Part of the Problem, and it's with Dave Smith, who's kind of a more, I don't want to say right-leaning, because that's not exactly it.
Libertarian?
Yeah, he's a libertarian, but he's a Mises libertarian, which is kind of more, less apologetic. Let's put it that way. Like they're not as concerned with PC and all that kind of culture around that.
Wasn't Mises an economist?
I think so. Yeah, yeah. And so uh, he's from that sect of the Libertarian Party, and he had that episode called Ben Shapiro's Four Myths, and he does a decent job recounting some of the history and some of the kind of things that Ben omits when he does the retelling of this stuff. And so, I've kind of come to like three major conclusions. One, like it's tragic what's happening over there. Like tragedies when there are no good options left. So it's tragic. Two, there's probably not a lot that we in the States can do that would not, that either through our action or our inaction, that would stop the loss of innocent life. And three, that's probably something that side of the world needs to figure out. And I guess the fourth thing I would say is that there needs to be a reckoning with half of the country in our country about some of the malevolent ideologies that have been laundered under the guise of virtue over the past decade or so. That should also be apparent to people now, hopefully. But, praying for everyone over there. Obviously, it's horrific, and there are a lot of casualties and plenty of humanitarian crisis in Gaza right now.
So I've heard that, right. So they say it's an open air prison, and they say there's lots of that Israel's occupying lots of different regions and doing all this. And so I don't know enough about each individual conflict and all the historical stuff, but do you get a sense, like, it seems to me that, well, for one thing, Israel seems to be much more militarily stronger than, say, the Palestinians. At least let's stop there, right? So why doesn't Israel just wipe out the Palestinians?
What do you mean? Like, this is the idea of like, okay,
Because they can, and that might solve a lot of their problems.
maybe. Yeah.
I mean, but is it? I don't know. Maybe again,
By the way, I'm not for that.
No,
I'm
no,
not
I know
for
you're
that.
you're saying like, yeah,
Yeah.
what is stopping
But-
them from doing so?
Right. They can. So in my head, the answer to that is, well, they don't want they don't want the killing. They don't want to kill an entire population. I don't think that would be the same if Hamas had the military might that they want. Or the Palestinians, I mean, well, they elected Hamas, right? So
Yeah, but they elected him in like 2006, and there hasn't been an election since. So like that's like saying like, whatever, we elected Bush in 2008. And so,
Okay.
I mean, it's like, yeah, like technically true, and also
so
they're
would they have,
disproportionately young population, so it's unlikely that many of them took part in that election, even if we are holding things that happened 17 years ago.
But why haven't they had another election?
That would probably be because of Hamas, I would assume. Yeah.
so do you think that they would vote them out?
I don't know. There's
Yeah,
other
I don't know.
there's other groups that kind of stand to front Israel and on behalf of the Palestinians. The Israelis, from what I understand, Netanyahu included, part of his idea to keep the Palestinian population fragmented was to, and I hope, I could be getting this wrong, so check this for sure, was to help provide funding to what would become Hamas in order to take power away from, I think it was the Palestinian Authority or something like that. So like you're essentially like funding, it'd be like, a Republican saying, hey, I'm going to fund the Green Party to try and take, market share away from the Democrats. And it's like, yeah, like that, it's pretty cynical. And the one of the best lines in that Part of the Problem podcast is in his opening, and it goes, each week or whatever, however often he puts it out, he goes, if you want to know who our next enemies are, look at who we're funding right now, right? Because it's like, okay, well, what about the Mujahideen during the Cold War? It's like, oh, that turned into Bin Laden and his crew, right? Or it was Bin Laden and his crew at the time. And you can just go through this over and over again throughout the Middle East. So yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know if they would vote him out or not. I also don't think campaigns like and I'm not saying that this is what they should be concerned with, but it's just an observation. I don't think campaigns like what Israel's doing right now are likely to engender a lot of animosity against Hamas, or maybe better to say it, towards and favorability towards Israel, like seeking future peace with Israel. I don't. It seems, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like that would not be likely.
I wonder too if people, and by the way, I guess I should clear up my original first statement. It was like, yeah, I kind of agree with Sam there. Of like, I definitely condone the killing of people. Just like they weren't trying to seize land or anything. It was just killing of people just to kill people.
Nope,
Um,
Kyle, you believe in the rapture and you're ready to happen. So
yeah,
I know.
yeah. No, that's so. I just want to make sure because kind of butchered that one a little bit. But coming back to, I wonder if people that are actually in Palestine, because I get it. I mean, we could go back. There are centuries or bad actors on both sides, but people in Palestine, I wonder if they actually know. And it's just more like a question because I know I see it here in the States too. I wonder if they actually how informed they are on what would be good for them and what would be considered good for them. Because I wonder too if there's so much I'm going to even say propaganda, but maybe misinformation at the civilian level that they really don't understand. Like they believe that what is currently happening is probably the best thing for. I don't know. Unless I'm just kind of curious.
Kind of like the North Koreans. Like they
Yeah,
don't they like
yeah,
think, yeah, anything obviously like America is just like the worst thing. They're like we're dogs over here and you know,
yeah. I'm very curious because it's hard to sit across the pond and just be able to articulate in our with all of our lights and everything. It's just I know they have technology and electricity over there, but it's just one of those things like the we're not in that environment. So I always wonder what it's like for them.
hmm.
Yeah. Do you wonder about that for us too? Like, do you think maybe
I
that
do.
we're like exposed to more pro-Israel stuff than like a neutral telling of the story might be?
Yeah, because it's hard to decipher what is like what somebody's always gonna I say always, that's an absolute from my perspective,
Hmm.
there seems to be a spin on it either way. And
Sure.
there's very few because I think it's honestly because of for ratings, like who's it all comes down for me, this is my interpretation. It all comes down to who's funding it. I saw it in school a lot when it comes to who's funding the research. There tends to be a little bit of bias one way. Or you say, hey, we're not funding you to go look at the rocks, we're funding you to look at the water kind of thing.
Mm.
And then by just not ignoring it, but not really looking into one aspect of it, you really only get one part of the story. So I do think there's a lot of that in our reporting.
Yeah, I mean it's hard. I try, I consume some news that is definitely pro-Israel. So, but I'm also aware, I also see the people that are arguing against it,
Hmm.
and I think I would be doing myself a disservice if I just completely ignored their side because well, first of all, I know that what I'm taking in is very pro-Israel, so they're not really going to be painting Israel in a bad light. But um, uh, what was I going to say about this? Oh, that's why I mean, Kyle, I do like I on a religious side, I do agree with you. I think the Jews are God's chosen people,
Yeah.
so I would religiously I would be on their side. However, I know that like in given my first response, I didn't bring that up because I think a more broad, more applicable answer would be something along the lines of, well, since Israel is part of the West and they have Western values, I don't see other civilizations with what I think are those good ideals that Western civilization brings. So that's why I would be in favor of those ideals spreading.
Mhm.
And so if I had to pick a side, right? So, if I'm going to if I'm an alien and they're just having to come in and weigh in on this conflict and I don't know what's going on, I would pick the side that is trying to uphold a certain set of ideals that I believe are good for civilizations. So
What are the
that's
ideals? Can you give me some examples?
um, of Western
Yeah.
ideals.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean, well, the idea of like free speech, the idea of having people being somewhat inclusive and the people that you're allowing to like live in the area and freedom of religion, this sort of stuff.
Okay.
A particular type of call it uh, innocent until proven guilty. That's a pretty good value.
Sure.
I don't even think
Um,
we have that in the States sometimes.
Well, yeah, that's imperfectly
sure.
realized to be sure.
Yeah.
And then something I think Mike, maybe you had said was this whole um, making victimhood virtuous. You know, I think that is frowned upon or shy. Is I don't think that's a good thing, and especially on the nation front. And you could kind of see that again. I could be completely wrong here, but I you could almost see that in the way that the um, the particular Hamas people think that they're martyrs, and they think like, well, I'm going to die, and it's going to like I prefer to die because of X, Y, and Z because it will show Israel to be a terrible people or something like that.
Yeah, I think
Um,
there's also like a religious element to that with Islam. Have you ever seen any of those like, memes that are going around these days? Like it's like the male urge to die for a cause greater than yourself, and it'll show like if it's a European example, it'll show like knights in armor, it'll have some like orchestral music playing or that something like that. I think there's like a lot of that too. That's not like necessarily viewing it as victimhood, but like as a, and I'm not saying this is what it is, but I think it's viewed as a noble sacrifice.
sure, um, definitely. I also think probably you're right, and I'm not going to argue against that. Um, um, but I do think there's like in general elevating the status of victimhood is not a good thing on any front, and it sucks because here in the West, like you're seeing a lot of that, which is not the ideal that I would want. So, um, yeah, it kind of stinks to see it here.
No,
But
I agree with that part of it in terms of, let's just say in the States or in the States plus Western Europe. I'm all about, yeah, I'm with you.
yeah,
Um, yeah, I do think that, what do you okay, so here's another thing. Since we're a free speech inclined network, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't have started this whole thing. What do you think about? We're pretty anti-cancel culture, and we're not shy about calling cancel culture out for what it is. Not none of this like BS, like, oh, it's just accountability culture, or there's consequences for what you say. There's always been consequences for what you say. That kind of stuff. What do you think about these students who are at like these universities that have put out statements, saying, we condemn Israel, etc., or it was their fault, blah, 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 like nonsense like that for 10/7. Um, what do you think about those students having like job offers rescinded, being out, like publishing lists of those, of the members of those student organizations, all that kind of stuff? Do you see that as cancel culture? Do you see some of that as cancel culture, some of that is not?
I mean, if I had to, at the root of that, if I have to look at our values too, at FreedomCast,
Mm-hmm.
I would say, yeah, maybe don't, because I could say something, and I could also have a job offer rescinded. Like I could say anything in the world, or I could just talk about how I'm from Texas and I love to hunt, and people may not hire me because of that. And so, I think it really depends on the person. Again, I do believe in our values of free speech in America, and so I think yeah, having the job offers rescinded, it's it's just also oh, I think Sam had a good point about there's a smart way to do it and there's a wise. Is it smart to go out there and say these things? Maybe not, but is it wise? Definitely not. So it's just what you say does have consequences, but you have to be kind of use a little bit of wisdom. Unfortunately, I do think that certain students, no matter what university they attend, at a certain age, you are some I would argue are a little bit smarter than others, yes. But when it comes to a measure of wisdom, some of them they they may not have that there yet. And not saying I do or I have it more than they do, but it's just you have to be wise with what am I saying and the impacts that it can have on my future after college. So I mean, to answer the question, do I think like yeah, job offers rescinded? I mean it's fair. I don't necessarily agree with like ruining someone's like after because I also know how hard it was as a student to get a job, flying very low under the radar. So I mean, that's just kind of my initial take on it without knowing too many of
So
the
you are
details.
or are not okay with students losing their jobs, their job offers?
Uh, I mean, the idea, I'm not okay with the idea of it.
Gotcha.
So, but what do you, okay, I think there's some clarification that could be had here. Um, if you had to define cancel culture a little bit better, what would you what would you say it is?
However you define it, because I think this is the each person can only answer it relative to their own standard.
Well, I noticed there was a difference back in this would have been a few years ago when cancel culture was hot on everybody's mind and people were like, "Oh, you're going to get canceled," and then all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed there was a difference. So so if I said something
Mm-hmm.
that let's see how if I how did I think about this? If I said something in private that wasn't meant to get out, let's say, um, and then somebody had like found out about that and then decided to get me canceled for it, I think that'd be slightly different than if I was out like marching in the streets about something and then getting canceled for that. It was kind of like if you're saying one thing and then secretly something else, and then that something else gets out, you're getting canceled for that. I think I think that's a bit different than getting canceled for the first thing when you're saying the thing out loud. And
It's
I know I butchered that a little bit, but it was kind of
it's
like,
yeah.
go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say it's a very muddy line, especially with how reporting is being done. Bad actors on both sides. We all know that in some cases, but oh geez, what was the kid Mike, where the MAGA kid who was staring down that guy and beating on the
Oh,
drums or
Nicholas
whatever.
Sandman.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
case in point, that kid's life could have, or I don't know, I didn't read
It
too
would
much
have
on it,
been
but
if not for digital
it
media. Yeah.
right. So like I said, I don't like the idea of per se that, and then, again, the individual scenarios would dictate that, but I don't like. That's why I say I don't like the idea of like canceling just because of something that you said, or just answer one like they can. We all make mistakes. We're all not perfect.
Mm-hmm.
We can all admit that. And so if somebody could dig up something you said on the playground, 10 years ago when you had no idea what it meant, you just said it and still cancel you and ruin your whole life from that, then sure.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not a fun thing to have. So
I don't want to set up a set of incentives though where people who have abhorrent ideas just harbor them secretly and talk about them amongst groups that none of us have uh, none of us are privy to necessarily. I think privacy is an important right and ideal for sure, but I don't know if maybe I'm misunderstanding. If I say A privately and then I say not A publicly and it comes out that I said A privately, I don't know why that would be better than someone who just says A publicly.
I didn't say one was better than the other. I said there was a difference
Okay,
there,
fair
and
enough.
I was trying and to be fit to maybe defend myself, I definitely butchered it because as I'm thinking through this, I because I'm trying to remember the examples that came up those years ago where it was like if I'm making a joke in the office
Mm-hmm.
and I say like a racy joke or an off like a off color comment,
Mm-hmm.
but then again I'm like surrounded by like my coworkers that I know they don't care, but it was just some person who might have overheard me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm more or less like, I know what I said out loud.
Mm-hmm.
And it was within the context, a perfectly normal conversation or joke to be had.
Mm-hmm.
I think some people might be quick to try and get you canceled for that. Whereas you then had individuals who might have been like recorded saying something like I'm just thinking of like the James O'Keefe stuff where they would be like
Mm-hmm.
at a bar
Oh yeah.
saying something or like, hey, I like this is what we're really doing behind the scenes. And then that comes out and then because you saw cancel culture like kind of a two-way street there
Mm-hmm.
on both sides. And I was trying to like figure out okay, what's the difference here? Because the people that like say got busted or I say busted, but James O'Keefe filmed, right, saying something in a bar. Um it was like I viewed that as being different than someone who might have, wore a weird costume on Halloween that was like someone way over there got offended at
Yeah.
and then tried to get you canceled for. Like there's a difference.
No, I agree.
So I'm just trying to figure out where the difference lies, and that's why I asked. Like, let's clarify that, because I guess to answer your question, I'm not so sure I've thought through this enough to really give a thought out response. But would it change your idea at all? Like, so these kids, they come out and they say, we're against Israel, and then they're having job offers rescinded. Would it change at all if they came out and said something like, we don't believe in capitalism, and then got their job offers rescinded? It's like, can you blame companies for, like, I'm not hiring you? You don't, like, why would I?
No, I mean,
what I mean?
I definitely think companies have a discretion when they hire people, and here come the the cancel culture folks are going to say something like, yeah, that's all we're saying too. This is the Michael Knowles point. He says essentially, look, it's not about the liberal, small L liberal ideal of free speech. It's about free speech to what end? And so the question is, now we're just arguing over what the just ends are. I think that there is some truth to that it's not just that not everything goes, that we do need an Overton window, and the Overton window will be enforced by normative standards. No, I don't. To be just candid, well, first the cancel culture thing. Yeah, if you're saying something like people who are in positions of authority are revealed to be lying or hypocrites, and as a consequence they get fired or voted out, that doesn't strike me as cancel culture. Even though I'm not super, as you know, I'm not super comfortable with some of the tactics anyway that O'Keefe uses. But
That's voting out character. That's a character thing.
well,
though,
yeah,
to
be sure, like there are cases of that.
Yeah.
But to the extent you're talking about something like the Covington kids, like what you were referencing, Kyle, or like James Damore at Google, it's like those are cancel culture to me. That's like, hey,
Yeah.
you said something that's against a disfavored socio-political ideology that exists, that's existence is contingent on the eradication of other viewpoints. And it's like, and so that eradication is the cancel culture. And so people will often say, well, people on the left get canceled too, like quote unquote anti-war voices on the left. That's one category. And people who are critical of Israel on the left. It's like, well, yeah, that's probably true to some extent. It's definitely not as true as people being canceled, at least in the last decade and a half or so, on the right. But there is some of that. And I mean, obviously the Twitter files, we see examples of the way you can blend cancel culture with censorship and kind of institute that at a social media platform level. But to me, there's a difference between if someone says, like, if let's say that you were someone who was sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, and you say something like, I think Israel's expansion of settlements, the trend of Netanyahu challenging the Supreme Court and pushing it in a more conservative direction, and maybe Netanyahu's more belligerent, and therefore I support the people of Palestine. That is a different statement to me than saying something like, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, or that the 10/7 attacks were justified. I would say that I would certainly come down in the camp if someone said the former thing, the thing about kind of being sympathetic to the Palestinian people and having these critiques of Israel. If they got fired, I would be, unless it was for like, Israeli think tank or something like that, I would classify that as cancel culture. I don't know if I'm going to say that someone being fired for chanting a mantra that is based around the eradication of a certain type of people. I'm not so sure I'm going to say that that's cancel culture. I'm still not super comfortable with it, but if we are going to approach this thing of where not everything is just the form of free speech, it's also the substance of on what you speak on the behalf of, then those latter two examples I think are less controversial with respect to quote unquote cancellation and that kind of thing. But it's also one of those things, like, once you open the door a little bit to cancel culture, what wall stops the dam from breaking and going all the way through? As Glenn Greenwald points out, sorry, just one more quick point. Glenn Greenwald points out, there are states, including Texas, where, and I'm not for this, but if you were to say, like, let's boycott, divest, and sanction Israel as kind of like a non-kinetic response to try and put some pressure on Israel. Like, that's against the law. And again, I'm not for BDS, but that is something that does happen. And it's like, well, it seems a little bizarre that that's against the law when you can still like agitate against like other state governments or certain political regimes within the United States.
Yeah, and I was just kind of thinking there's got to be. So again, one of the Western civilization values is the ethic involved there is the Judeo-Christian ethic.
Mm-hmm.
So we hold free speech and to a very, very high value. It's very high up, but is that the highest? And I think I would argue, and I think Western civilization is founded on the idea that, well, it's not the highest. It's way up there, but it's not the highest.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you are going to override free speech in a way, it's got to be for a higher ideal. And it perhaps maybe that's the difference when some people are canceled and we're okay with it, or then other people are canceled and you're like, no, we're not okay. Maybe that's what is like the calculations going on in our head. That would at least make sense to me, because I do think there's a different way that you had said that, Mike. You like, as far as someone who's sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. Just saying that, I don't see why that would ever get you canceled. If I put that in my bio, hey, sympathetic to Palestinians, versus from the river to the sea, or Israel is occupying whatever, or I don't know what you want to put there, but I think there's a difference there, and there's certainly a difference with going onto campus and shouting and being anti-Semitic. There's certainly a difference there, and so my free speech can say, okay, I can put I'm sympathetic to the Palestinian cause in my bio, but it's definitely not a wise thing for me to go running around chanting, tearing down posters and stuff. Kyle, like just the smart versus wise thing. It's like, that's not helping people's view of you. So yeah, I'm not surprised that companies are rescinding their offer. It makes sense.
All right, so let's say that one of these, let's say like some junior who's a part of the, what do they call that? There's some acronym now for folks from the Middle East, like MEAS or something like that. Anyway, let's say that some junior at New York University just had her summer internship for 2024 canceled. And she says, you know what? I thought we were living in a free speech society. And she wants to come on, and for the summer of 2024, she wants to put out a podcast on Israel-Palestine, the history and her perspective. And she wants to start it on FreedomCast. What would you say? I mean, we all would have to meet to talk about this. What would you say? What questions would you have?
This is oddly specific.
Yeah.
Just hypothetically.
Yeah.
Let's say her name is Kate.
I mean, I would treat it like a normal job interview. Like, are your values aligned with the company's values, and how does that look? Not to say, it's anybody's game until we have that discussion. And so, yeah, I'd have to go back and devise like those. I'm not gonna be like, where do you stand on this? Like, I mean, because that is a diverse thought, right? Where you tend to stand. It's like, but what are your beliefs? Like, how does it align to, or I guess our freedom of thought? How does it align to our core values?
Mm-hmm.
Are you saying that this person wants to start a podcast with our company, or just wants an interview?
She wants to be an associate podcast. So one of the ones that we help host and that we set up the broadcasting infrastructure for. But she does all the recording, all the post-production.
This is a real or hypothetical?
Well, I want you to answer it as if it's real.
Okay.
I've already told her several times the answer is no.
I just need a reason. No. No, I mean...
Yeah, I mean, there's no... Like, there's no yes and then there's no until... I guess like you go through the interview.
Yeah. What you wouldn't have any special questions?
Off the top of my head, and again, being severely uneducated on a lot of these things, I would do myself a disservice and just trying to shoot one out right now. So I'd have to obviously prep for it.
Okay, sure, yeah.
Just like you would with any interview, prep the questions, think about it a little bit more specific to the job posting and all that.
Yeah, I also
Right.
don't
I
think
mean,
that
like,
you don't you have to keep saying uneducated. I think it's just like that we're not always perhaps as informed as we'd like to be.
Yeah,
But that's
the
true of
American way.
well, it's true of most topics, right? You can only be so informed about so many things.
Yeah,
well, I mean, we have our group here is we have a set of ideals, and
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, if the person wanted to come on and make a podcast just doing nothing but bashing me, like she's gonna be like, I have free speech to do so, but like, why would we? That doesn't seem like a good idea for
yeah,
her to have a podcast of just bad mouthing me like for every episode.
yeah. How does that carry our brand forward?
Right.
Sure. No, to the extent we talk about, when we review things, values, alignment, that kind of stuff. Like I'm with you. Like I don't think that we relax or tighten that standard for any individual. But yeah, if their content is more apt to be something that makes a strong stance has a that touches on controversial topic or controversial areas, I do think I mean, I would ask about their perspective on those things, not to screen for them. I mean, it just comes down to one side versus the other. It's much more, probably how she's getting there. But at the same time, I would want to know, like, hey, you know, we're going to we could carry some liability in associating with you, legal as well as soft. And therefore, I want to hear out what you have to say, what you'll be advocating. Like that, if you remember when we first started, maybe 3 months into our company, we had an individual reach out to us from Canada who was talking about potentially joining the network. And we were like, oh, hey, look, this guy's actually way more established than we are. That's kind of cool. He kind of like vibes with the free speech side of things. But we kind of had like a little bit of like something doesn't
Mhm.
exactly seem kind of right here. Like he's commenting on so many of the controversial things that come up, like as they come up, where it kind of becomes this reactionary thing. So let's at least try and bring him in for an interview. And that never happened. But I would think that would be an important process regardless.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, gentlemen, anything else you want to say on this topic?
Genesis. I'm just kidding.
Obviously, we're gonna solve this between us three.
Yeah.
So we can get it done. We just think hard enough.
Yes.
Yeah. It is unfortunate for all the innocents that the people that are just living their daily lives that just happen to be a product of collateral damage. It is very, very unfortunate.
Yeah. No, I'm with you, man. There's a lot of tragedy to go around in this situation.
It's crazy to think about how, like, I don't know, maybe I'll get off my soapbox, but like how blessed we are here. Like for the most part, I mean, Mike and I in the area that we live in, surrounded by water, to be safe from certain things, to be able
Let's
to
be real. Canada
be
up top and Mexico below. We're not under a whole lot of major threats here.
yeah, and so it's just, but also the values that we have as Americans, the rights that we have to be able to protect ourselves in certain situations. Like, I mean, if we want, we can go out and buy as much food, as much water as we want, that our banks will allow us, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But we have the freedom to do certain things. We have the freedom to go fill our cars up with gas. I mean, I'm talking about just like any natural disaster too, not just like the end of the world stuff, but like
Right.
just my wife and I were talking about that. It's like the ability to go and be prepared for it, because we live in a coastal area where hurricanes tend to happen. Knock on wood. I mean, we're due. It's past the 6-year mark for us, and so average, if you look at like a historical average, 6 years is about the cycle. But we have the ability to go and do these things, to buy food, to prep for that. So I think about not just the like that, but the freedom to do that, to walk around and go and purchase things, do whatever we want, go have fun, go out there and not have to worry for the most part, about those freedoms and liberties being infringed. It is a huge blessing, but it makes you think, makes you stop and think too, like, wow, what about those people that don't have, like, either the governments have taken or the governments are corrupt. Just thinking about living in that state of fear or worry just kind of makes you be a little bit more thankful for what we do have.
Mike, I want you to comment on something. What would you say on, because I've heard Shapiro say this as well as Prager, about if Israel were to put down their guns, there would be another Holocaust, but if Hamas or Palestinians were to put down their guns, there'd be peace.
I think the former is more likely than the latter.
Of Israel putting down their guns?
Yeah, I think if Israel put down its guns, they're more likely to be eradicated than it is that there would be peace if Hamas put down theirs.
Okay.
So, for whatever that's worth.
Is it non-zero?
What do you mean?
The latter?
Yeah, I don't. There's a chance there would be peace, I'm sure, but I would say it's less likely than like, it doesn't strike me that Israel is. I don't know is a better way to say it. I don't know if Israel is content with things as they are, or if they would seek to accrete the land over which they have dominion, and not in some sort of like violent military campaign necessarily, but in a campaign that would move masses of humanity either out or bring them in as kind of like, not second-class citizens, because that's probably not true, but as not as full citizens as the Israelis. And it does seem that Israel, and this is understandable, wants to maintain some proportional dominance in their civic body, which is like, that's probably true for any governing structure. So I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but...
Yeah, and I guess to your point, I mean, I think it's human nature, right? So if you're the military top dog in the region and you are still a smaller nation than everywhere else, it's human nature that you'd be like, well, I'm going to just expand here and like, come on, let me just take this little bit of land. So I don't think any human is above that. So I suspect that probably would happen. I think you're right. Yeah.
Okay. All right, gentlemen.
But yeah, sorry. But then there wouldn't be, but I don't think there would be a genocide, right? So if the Palestinians put down their weapons.
Yeah, I doubt it, and also I don't know what you call, like, does a genocide only happen if it's in a concentrated amount of time? Is it only if it's casualties? Is it only if it's, what if it's land loss? What if it's over a decade instead of a year? I don't know.
Genocide would be the death of people, right?
Sure,
Mass,
but like by direct military action, or because they were displaced and there was disease, they had no clean water, they had all that kind of stuff. So, and again, I'm not saying that's exactly what they would do. I don't have any reason to believe that with certainty that is what they would do. It's just, I don't know that the thing standing between us and paradise on the Palestine-Israeli issue is the presence of military arms within the hands of the Palestinians.
Yeah. I mean, there's probably a lot standing between us and paradise over there.
Yes, yeah, to be sure.
Yeah.
All right. So to wrap things up for tonight, thank you all for joining us. Freedom to own guns. Yes, absolutely. Nicole, thank you. A vital right, and certainly something that Israelis will continue, hopefully, to embrace more fully.
Do they have guns over there, like civilians?
I believe they can, but I don't know the intricacies for sure. I know that at some point in time, all Israelis are required to serve in the Israeli Defense Force in some capacity. Yeah. So I apologize for these embedded podcasts that are not loading right now. This is our kind of what we're following page. If you want to kind of get a sense for the ideas and thinkers and interviews that have informed us, check that out. This is our website, freedomcast.us. You can go there anytime. Click join the network if you're interested in launching a podcast. We talked about that today, and I suspect we'll be talking about that again in Q4 this year. It gives you some instructions here. If you're interested in further supporting us, you can go to the support page, which will bring you here. 4 ways to support. You can go to locals, join our locals community. You can go to freedomcast.substack.com. Become a free subscriber to our weekly newswire. We talk about the week's top stories, or we source the week's top stories. And if you're interested in some merch, you can go to our spring store. It's also linked on the support page. And remember, for the first 3 people who reply with a completed bingo, not a completed bingo card, a card with 5 adjacent dots daubed, so 5 podcasts with 1 episode watched each that are in a row, we will send out a mug and a ball cap. Or if you prefer something else, we can probably arrange for that as well. But do you guys have anything else? All right. Well, thank you, Kyle. Thank you, Sam. And until next time, folks.